Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to this latest episode of British Culture Albion Never Dies. Today I am interviewing Roland Hulme, a British author based in the US, based there for around the last 20 years. We talk about the latest James Bond continuation novel from Charlie Higson called On His Majesty's Secret Service, set around the coronation of King Charles III. Both of us have already put out YouTube videos about it. Mine was just a 3-4 minute video including footage of the celebrations at Hyde Park, something I did podcast episodes about. Roland's is very, very interesting. It's 20-30 minutes and he gives his perspective as a novelist on this newly published novel, which of course celebrates the coronation of King Charles, but also commemorates the 60th anniversary of Ian Fleming's novel On Her Majesty's Secret Service. This is a, let's say, spoiler light discussion. I can't promise no spoilers. We are talking about the book, but we try not to give too much away. I hope you enjoy this. I do hope you enjoy the book. I will say straight up, I really enjoyed Charlie Higson's book. And I enjoyed the conversation with Roland because, again, we're just going into very, very light spoilers. The book does touch on some aspects of American politics. It's from a very British perspective. I know some American readers have commented upon this, so I asked Roland about it. As I say, he is a Brit who's lived in the US and knows a bit more about it than myself, or I'd say most other Brits. So I really appreciate his insight, and as I say, he is a novelist. His perspectives on this new novel, for me, are really interesting. I feel very lucky to have him on the podcast again, and lucky to have him as a friend. Brilliant. Recording in progress. Roland, thank you very much for joining me again.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, especially I'm excited to chat to you about this book.
Yes, it's the latest James Bond official continuation novel On His Majesty's Secret Service.
Which is fun, because they're keeping up now 6 months between each book. It was, May of last year was With a Mind to Kill, then September was the first of Kim Sherwood's 00 trilogy. Now we've got this, 6 months later. I don't even know they expected to be putting out a book every 6 months.
Oh yes, especially at a time when people have been complaining about the length of time between Bond films and games, and yet here with the novels, we're sitting pretty.
Absolutely.
And these books are all really different, aren't they?
Yeah, that's what I really enjoyed about it, because I really liked Anthony Horowitz's books, and I thought they were perfect. And then reading this, it's a completely different vibe. It's it's set in the modern day. It's a little more fast paced and a little rougher, but not in a bad way. It's a little more raw. It's kind of Anthony Horowitz channels Fleming perfectly in one regard, and then Charlie Higson managed to channel a different side to Fleming that's equally authentic.
Yes, I found Higson is he's sophisticated, but he's not flowery.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. And he added there was more they always talk about James Bond being sex, sadism, and snobbery. He added some nice snobby touches while we're inside James Bond's head, which I actually really enjoyed. Yes.
You mentioned that on your YouTube review. Would you like to go into that a little bit more? What did you notice as the snobbery aspects?
Well, I was just thinking the Ian Fleming books, then sometimes he'd go off in his diatribe about homosexuals are just mixed up people and I feel sorry for them and women are terrible drivers. And there was one, young men these days just want to be Tommy Steele. And then you'd have to Google Tommy Steele because you might not know who he is. And it was interesting to have, Charlie Higson's Bonds thinking about, he reads The New Scientist. He was thinking about gut bacteria and he was thinking about clothes and he doesn't like to wear logos. But it's different when you have these asides that are about contemporary subjects that you might be familiar with in a way that you're not familiar with, contemporary subjects of the 1950s.
Absolutely, because as you mentioned, when Fleming was writing it, Fleming did not write a period piece. His was, pushing the envelope of modernity in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was exactly like this. It was a book set in the modern day, and he made them. He grounded his books really well by using real brands, real events, mentioning real people.
Yes, which happens in this book. And I've seen some complaints about that this book does touch on real individuals and gets pretty close to the bone in not naming real individuals.
Yeah, it's interesting because I noticed from an American perspective, having been here, I know that that Charlie Higson's some of the things that he writes are a very British viewpoint of the situation in America. That it's not that he's wrong about anything. It's just I think it lacks some of the nuance, and it lacks, in America, people, think things like the January 6th insurrection happened, but they didn't happen from isolation, and they didn't happen because, these people watched videos on, to a certain extent, they watched videos and they were driven by these groups, but also there's a deep dissatisfaction with certain things that are going on in America that I think reading Charlie Higson's a little bit about it, it was like, I don't think he understands what those dissatisfactions are, because they cast a kind of different light on what happened.
Yeah, I read it and I was wondering, gosh, what was an American audience think about this? Of course, I just spent a tiny bit of time there. But I also, when I was staying in America, what I noticed is that people could stand being very pro something or very anti something, but being, how can I put it, disinterested.
Yes.
Genial disinterest rarely seemed to rile people. I discovered this quite by accident. But it does seem that Charlie Higson's Bond just has that kind of genial, disinterested kind of a view of what happens over there, which seems very realistic to me.
Yeah, I think, and that's true. And I can't even call it a criticism, because that's probably what James Bond would think.
I'm seeing it more and more around here, and then I started to flip it around because it's interesting. It is a feature of the book, right? I was thinking, gosh, how many kind of American, say, Hollywood movies are there which have a slightly less than nuanced perspective on parts of the world I know?
That's fascinating. We just had St. Patrick's Day here, and I had everyone around me kind of making, I wouldn't say they were hero worshipping, but they were recognizing the IRA in a way that I found really distasteful. It's like, oh yeah, the freedom fighters, the boys back home. And I was like, when I was a kid, I remember all these bombs blowing up. There was that terrible bomb that went off in London and killed all those horses. And I'm like, the IRA are a bunch of murdering bastards from my perspective. So it's so weird to see them kind of softly hero worshipped around St. Patrick's Day with this romanticized version of what was going on in Northern Ireland.
Yes, I do see it from here as well. And the idea that the IRA targeted the Irish security forces as well. Or my favorite thing, an American who said, I'm Irish and I hate the English, and that's why I drink Guinness. I thought, you do know the Guinness family are Protestant, right?
Yeah.
And have funded and given money to, anyway, let's not go into that. As you say, there are nuances.
Yeah, you're right. That's a really good example, though, because I think that bringing that up, because I think it is not necessary. It's not a criticism. I think some people I've spoken to in America are being like, "Oh, Charlie Higson, he's super lefty." And it's like, no. I think everything he wrote is fair, and maybe it lacked a certain lack of nuance with understanding of American politics, but he kind of brings it all together with the villain. Reveals that the villain has its own motivations for what he's doing.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel he has believable disinterest in what's going on over there. I mean, actually, when January the 6th happened, I was living in China, and we watched that, and there had been events with BLM as well. And a Chinese person just said to me, "You know what? The problem over there, they got way too much freedom. Here we have law and order."
Yeah,
So
well, I mean,
safe.
that's the thing, isn't it? Safety and freedom. And the problem I found, part of the American character is part of the American character, no matter what side of the political spectrum you are, is you don't like to be told what to do.
Yes. That, I mean, I noticed that as a manager, if there was something that just has to happen, I'd tell the Americans do the opposite, and they'd immediately do what we wanted them to do. It's easy managerial trick.
And so, I mean, that's interesting, and I think it brings into, it's interesting when a British author writes James Bond, because James Bond is British, and I know kind of he's now a global phenomenon, and Americans love him and are fascinated with him, and the Bond community is bringing more and more attention to like the James Bond books that perhaps weren't as popular. The books, maybe not compared to the films as they used to be, but it is at the end of the day, James Bond is an iconically British character, and I think that's what was cool about this book, was it was set during an iconically British event that everybody cared about.
Oh yes, absolutely. And that's something I do find curious, right? So if sometimes I watch a film that seems super American and then I find out it's been made in the UK, for example, Black Hawk Down, British director, a bunch of British stars, I believe much of it was made in the UK, but they are kind of they're doing almost our cartoon version of America for the Americans. Then you'll have a film like, say, Elizabeth, where it's, Kate Blanchett as Elizabeth, who's Australian, and the director, I think, had Indian heritage. But it's very, very interesting that you get sometimes an outside perspective on the insiders. This is very much an insider's perspective on the insiders.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, that's the thing, being British, growing up. Now I'm in America, and you do look through certain periods of history, including like what happened in Ireland. You're like, oh, were we the baddies?
Of course, I have the answer to that, which is no. But yeah, as I said, you and I, of course, we are both insiders and outsiders of British culture.
Yeah. And I think that's and Ian Fleming was to a certain extent as well, which I think is why, to me, that's one of the things that's always appealed to me about the James Bond books.
Yes, yeah. And I might add to that list of, Roald Dahl, of course, was kind of half English. J.R. Tolkien has, non-English heritage, but studied Englishness to a T.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, thinking about that, one of the things I really enjoyed about this book was a lot of it set in Hungary, which was relevant politically because, of course, Hungary has it's going through a kind of like right-wing phase at the moment, and they got closer ties to Russia than people might necessarily like. So it makes sense that this bad guy Athelstan of Wessex, he couldn't operate in the UK, but he could operate in the safety of Hungary. And I enjoyed that because I've been to Hungary, and I've been to Budapest, and it's also interesting how he managed to tie in the situation to what is going on in politics there, again in a way that makes sense to us right now. We don't even need to think about it, but to people reading this book in 70 years time, like they're reading the old Ian Fleming books, they might have to Google what was going on in Hungary in 2023.
I'm wondering if there's a fair few readers now who would have to Google who is Olban and what it
Maybe we're giving people too much credit,
but no, maybe it's an educational book in some ways.
Yeah, an educational book. And I was going to say, what do you think? What stood out about it to you?
For me, it's the fact that it's a very contemporary James Bond book, which doesn't get bogged down in kind of what is his backstory. Because, when I read the Fleming books, what really struck me is that he's not a terribly well fleshed out character at the beginning. A lot of what we think of as the blocks of his life were filled in with, say, letters or questions, or they came in later books because Fleming had been asked more and more and more detail. But Fleming did kind of keep him a bit of a cipher at the start of the series, and Higson kind of does the same. Like, what is Bond service history in this book? It's kind of left pretty open.
Yeah, and I think that works because there's a challenge of having a contemporary Bond. And Jeffrey Deaver had a contemporary Bond, and he invented a different backstory for Bond. And it's like, okay, you can do that, but then it's not James Bond. Whereas by not having any details about it, just like when you watch the movie, they're always modern day movies with a modern day James Bond, even though he's been in action for 60 years. It just works when you leave out those details.
And I just finished reading a Raymond Benson book where you could almost see the different elements of a bit of Fleming here, a bit of the movie here, a bit of his own thing here, all kind of shaken together.
Yes.
So his Bond felt like an old World War II veteran and kind of spoke like one, but then the people around him could speak like people in the 90s. But there was kind of, it seems to exist in this whole little dream world. Fleming doesn't age, and the people around him might age at different paces. Here it felt coherent.
It did, absolutely. I was thinking to compare Higson's style to different writers. Benson was the one I think he's kind of closest to, because Benson he's a very craftsman-like writer, and he writes good action scenes, and he's got the essential ingredients, and his Bond is contemporary. But Higson just pulled it off really, really well.
Yes. This for me was it felt, I hesitate to use the word polished, but it felt right.
It felt right, and I think that was it. I was excited for it ever since Charlie Higson had talked about how it just like flowed out of him, and he wrote it quickly. And I'm like, things that are written quickly are normally really good.
Yes, I was astonished to find out one of my favorite novels, which is one of the longest in the series, only took 30 days to write. And the novelist said, the reason it took so long is because I had to take a break because my fingers hurt from all the typing. Yeah. So I'm interested. I mean, you are a writer. Why is that?
I think it's when you just chat, when you dial into a story and characters, it literally just flows out of you almost faster than you can type. I was thinking some of my best books and most successful books. One of them was written in 5 days, and it was just
wow.
like, oh, I've got a. But it's when you get into the zone, it's like you're tuning to a frequency that no one else can hear, and it's telling you this story, and then you use your ability to describe things in the English language to explain what's happening. And there's nothing better than like really getting into the zone, really getting into the flow state where it's like, it's almost, you finish it and you look at it and like, who the hell wrote this? Oh, it's not bad though. And it's almost, I don't know, it's like speaking to another dimension or something. But when it flows, it's always good because it makes sense. I think writer's block you often experience when you write yourself into a corner and then you pause and you look back and you're like, oh, you know, the character wouldn't really have done that, or that's a bit coincidental, or this doesn't really make sense. So when it flows, you can generally have a pretty good idea that it is a coherent plot, which I think was one of the things I liked about this book, is it had a straightforward plot with a couple of really good twists, but it made sense. It didn't leave me scratching my head. I didn't need to figure out, oh, how did this end up happening like this? It was completely different to sort of the movie Quantum of Solace, for example, where it was sometimes quite difficult to figure out why Bond was going around to these places and beating these people up. Whereas Charlie Hickson's book had a really solid thread. You're like, I understand why Bond's doing this. This makes sense to me. I'm invested.
If we're comparing it to movies, in some ways, I thought of it as a bit like License to Kill, as opposed to The Living Daylights, in the sense that you have a big bad and he goes for him.
Yes. You know, that was Charlie Higson in his interview with David Zaritsky was talking about, you know, Bond is a good formula because you the first third of the book you don't need to have, because basically Bond just walks into M's office and M says, here's what you have to go and do it. And I thought, are we doing spoilers or not? I don't.
Either way.
Okay, well, I mean, there was something involving Moneypenny and Agent 009 who passed away. That, to me, I thought was a really effective way to give some emotional investment. Normally, Bond gets a mission and he saunters off, and you know he's just doing it for a paycheck or for king and country. But in this, there was also just that personal element to it that I really enjoyed, and it kind of made me a bit invested.
I was curious about that on two levels. First of all, because perhaps my one complaint about the Bond films is that this time it's personal, but every time it's personal. It's always personal now. I'm like, how small is this world?
Daniel Craig's Bond, you just be like, get into some therapy.
I wonder if M should say, just hand me your phone. Let me just see who's in your phone contacts, and we'll just start from there, checking them out.
Who's the son of this ski instructor?
Yes. Is there anyone you met at a coffee shop recently? Like, let's have a look into them.
I think that's a big mistake that, I mean, the Daniel Craig movies. I mean, obviously, some of the best Bond movies are the Daniel Craig movies, but some of the worst ones are the Daniel Craig movies. And I think precisely because of that, because they tried to make it personal and all about Bond, whereas we don't want it to be. We want it to be, you know, Pierce Brosnan gets a message and it gets a mission from M and goes off and does it.
Yes.
And you can
it's
bring
an
in
ex-girlfriend. How awkward.
Yes. I think that's how you can make it personal rather than, oh, look, it's the ski instructor's son who's jealous because daddy didn't pay enough attention to him.
Yes. I was also interested that Moneypenny is another man. I found that interesting because we've seen that with the Samantha Bond version where she's like, oh, it's going to go on a date with a gentleman, if you must know. And, and there's something in Spectre as well. But it does seem to be a new fad that Moneypenny is not solely interested in Bond.
And it's funny because that was more of a movie thing than a book thing.
Oh yeah.
Because Moneypenny and Bond really, you know, they didn't have a massive number of scenes together throughout all the books. No,
it seems to be more that he's, you know, there's more going on with him and his own secretary than him and M's secretary.
Absolutely.
And then I quite like the two of them have their own little adventure. They go off to a tailor together and have to, you know, get different fabrics because they both like the same one. I'll put that in a movie.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and my natural comparison is to the Raymond Benson ones. Again, he was an American author.
Yes, and that felt I've just been rereading 0-10, which is all about Hong Kong getting handed back, and it's interesting to look at it, to, you know, the elements that he put, because I think being an American author, Raymond Benson was able to give an outside perspective that kind of explained, you know, the justifications that the bad guy was maybe coming up with. Whereas I think as Brits, we think we thought at that time in 1997 a certain way about Hong Kong and what was happening.
I have strong thoughts now. I should get to that book. I just finished reading the Facts of Death.
Isn't that a great title?
It is a brilliant title, and I have a review coming out of it soon because it's all set about Cyprus, South Cyprus and Turkish Cyprus.
And isn't that interesting for an American author to focus on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then he's writing the British perspective on Cyprus. And I wouldn't suggest to anyone to use this book as a research piece, but for people who know nothing about it, I mean, why not? I haven't seen many adventure stories set about the Cyprus problem, which is interesting. I mean, it just is. Whichever side you're on, it is interesting.
That was the one where the soldiers in Cyprus were dying of a mysterious disease, wasn't it?
Yes, that's the opening chapter. And yeah, so he goes down to a place in Cyprus where, well, just been.
And I love that. That's what I think is really appealing about Bond books, and I think can give you even a closer connection. I mean, in this one, on His Majesty's Secret Service, there's a lot in Hungary, and he goes through the underground in Budapest, and to me that was awesome because I've been there. My brother used to live in Hungary, so I went to visit him in Budapest, and I was like, I've been on this tram, I've been in this underground, I've seen this. And it gives a special connection that really makes Bonds more exciting.
One of my secret sins is that I do overwatch the Michael Portillo railway journeys here in the UK. But what I always find interesting is that if he does a place that I've been to, I'm gripped. I love seeing the places that I have been to and he's going to. Surely I should be more interested in brand new places that I haven't been to. But in fact, no, if I've been there, I'm much more invested.
That is interesting, but somebody said that about, you go to Google Earth, and where's the first place you type in to see? It's going to be your house.
That's interesting, because I look at your house as well.
But it's like you have this tool, it can take you literally anywhere in the world. You're like, I want to see my house.
Yeah. I've done the same. I've done walks around my house with Google Street View. It's just mad. I know it's mad. But then a friend of mine was telling me about where he was brought up, and I've never been there. I don't know much about it. So I did the same. I kind of walked around the block and he was like, there's nothing there. And I was like, hey, I saw this botanical garden around the corner. And he was like, nah, never been there. Well, it looks really interesting.
Oh, isn't that? I guess so. Yeah.
But if you live there, I guess you're not so interested. I don't know.
I don't know. This whole character on His Majesty's Secret Service of Athelstan of Wessex reminded me, because I was born in Winchester, which is the capital of Wessex. And there's this bloke, I don't know if he's still around, who calls himself King Arthur, who dresses up in, Saxon robes and stuff like this, and stands for election every time there's a general election. And in my mind, that was one of the fun things reading about Athelstan of Wessex, and I was like, oh, that reminds me of the bloke in Winchester. And again, it's that connection. It's like, where I come from gets mentioned in a book, and it gets suddenly just you become more invested in it.
That is interesting because the UK has a lot of very strange local festivals, and you do get some odd characters. Sometimes they stand for election. Lord Such being the obvious one.
Screaming Lord Such.
Yep, monster raving loony party, a real political party that stood in elections.
Well, the problem is they're becoming less and less relevant as their lunacy enters the mainstream.
It's catching.
The next question I was going to ask was, do you have any criticisms of it?
I don't off the top of my head. I mean, it has that rough and ready feel. I know the turnaround time, from the publisher's side was really quick. So I think there were a few things that jumped out at me of, did he mean this character instead of that character? There seemed to be a few names here or there. But I know he said on David Zorinsky's interview that there were a few misprints that he noticed when he was doing the audiobook version.
Yeah. But I think it's difficult for even mainstream publishers these days are firing proofreaders and relying on Grammarly and stuff. So
I work for a publishing company. I'm very fully aware of the challenges. But yeah, I mean, it's not a criticism of the book or the story itself.
No, and I've always found that especially when you self-publish, you don't want there to be typos and errors and stuff, but you learn that you don't need to be completely anal retentive about it. You just have to
Yeah.
make sure there aren't any typos or mistakes that are going to make you pause and take you out of the story.
Absolutely. And actually, one of my favorite Fleming books is The Man with the Golden Gun, where you see more of the scaffolding of it towards the end in terms of the storytelling. And this has that kind of similar feel. I think you might have said before that you feel there are things, especially he writes about, say, American politics or whatever, if they'd gone through multiple iterations, they might have shaved it down, they might have smoothed it out. But I kind of like it being the bumpy ride it is.
I 100% agree. It's like, it's fun because it's almost like Charlie Higson sitting there telling you a story. But because it hasn't been super edited and hasn't been polished and it hasn't gone through all of the people who wring their hands together, it's kind of like he's telling you a story, but he's had a couple of pints. And I like it. It just has a little rawness to it. I think I mentioned in my video, there was one joke in it. This is not much of a joke.
You did say, I was curious, what is the joke? That's from Austin Powers.
Okay, there's a joke. I think he's talking to Captain Cornwall or something, and he says, "Tell me something I don't know." And Captain Cornwall says, "Dolly Parton's real name is Dolly." And James Bond says, "That's something I didn't know." And that was directly lifted from Austin Powers 3, where Beyonce asks Austin Powers, "Tell me something I don't know." And he goes, "I once open mouth kissed a horse."
I've seen a few iterations of that joke. I didn't realize it came from Austin Powers.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it came from somewhere before Austin Powers, but I was like, that's the kind of cheeky joke that I'm sure Ian Fleming Publications, if they feel that they have to edit the words of Ian Fleming himself, I'm sure they'd have been like, do we really need to have that joke in there? But they left it in there, and I like it. And even though it did take me a bit out of the book, because I was kind of like, wait, that's a joke from Austin Powers. At the same time, I was kind of like, I really like the fact it's included in there. It's a funny joke. It made me laugh. And it actually made me like that bloke, Captain Cornwall, who was, he didn't have much exposition about him. He was brought into this, and he had a very important role. But Charlie Higson didn't have much time to give him much character or backstory. And by having him say that joke, it kind of makes you have some affection for him, even though he hasn't had the opportunity to be fully fleshed out.
Absolutely. You know what? I just have to Google what is Dolly Parton's real name, because that's what took me out of the book when I was reading it. And yes, her real name is Dolly.
It's very interesting that he picked that particular one.
Yes. To be honest, I would have picked the fact that her husband doesn't go to her concerts. It doesn't. Apparently, he's not so interested.
That's my wife has never read any of my books. There we go.
Oh, she's never read your books.
No.
Oh,
they're not her sort of thing.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yes.
I mean, I work for a publishing company. Do I read my publisher's books? Well, I have to.
But
actually, they've published one on James Bond. I'm going through it with a red pen at the moment.
That's kind of fun when you see other books, that academic books as well. There was I don't know how familiar you are with it. There's a member of the Bond community, Dr. Lisa Funnell.
Yes,
yes, 5 books, and it's fascinating to really good academic books that she's written and other books that she's edited that delve into James Bond through a feminist lens.
I'm so excited because she is the rival to this book that's been published.
Oh,
because she does feminism James Bond, and this is gender in James Bond.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I'm about to read that. I've read a couple of bits from hers, if not the whole things of hers, and I find it fascinating when you drill down these things. I mean, I don't think there is any right or wrong when you want to interpret Bond the different ways.
No, I find her take really, really interesting, and I love that her favorite Bond girl is the one from GoldenEye. Yes. She has unique skills that Bond doesn't have. Rather than doubling up and saying, "Oh, she's just as powerful as he is and can do everything he does," she can do things that he can't do. I think that's so interesting.
Natalia, I was just thinking there are some bits that most Bond girls don't get the opportunity to show how resourceful they are. But that scene where she goes into the computer shop and is like, "I'm buying computers for the American school." It's like that shows real courage and ingenuity. And it's most Bond girls don't get the chance to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they've played with the idea a few times of an ordinary person going into Bond's world. But I think she's probably the one who comes out of that best. I mean, I know. Speaking about the Bond girl, I can't even pronounce her name. The Bond girl in no, just blanked over it. I have no idea what it is, but it's Ria. I can't pronounce it because it's an Icelandic name, but
I know some people didn't like her and didn't think she was fleshed out enough. I thought she was quite interesting.
Oh
The
yeah,
whole
I
idea
thought, I
of
thought she
being
was an
like,
interesting character. Yeah, yeah.
I liked the whole idea of, she'd been in a car accident because she was careless and reckless, and
Mm.
it had smashed up her face, and they'd rebuilt it so she was both ugly and beautiful at the same time.
Well,
That was very Flemingish.
yes, exactly. Because something that I really enjoy about Fleming's books is that, there's a person with a scar on his face, but it's James Bond. And there's a person with a
Yeah.
hook for a hand, but it's Felix. And the perfect people are the villains, whereas the movies totally switch that round.
Do you know, I had never, ever even thought about that, but that makes perfect sense. That's a fascinating take on it.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
you made me smarter today.
Well, what was it? The Honest Trailer's review of No Time to Die. There's something wrong with the face. They must hate the human race. As I say, Fleming really looked at the damaged people. I found that so much more interesting.
Yeah, I really like that. The thing I like about writing in my stories is, you write about damaged people, and it's nice because, especially with romance, it's like, hey, you can be a damaged person but still be deserving of love.
Yes, yes. I'm immediately thinking classic British literature. Jane Austen, we have two damaged people and they can make each other better. Or we have the
Yep.
Brontes, we have two damaged people who can make each other so much worse.
That's very true.
I'm here in Yorkshire, so the Brontes, I'm not far from where they live.
That's hysterical. And I'm just thinking again, you look back at Jane Austen, just such a successful writer so long ago.
Yeah.
And she invented like romance and stuff. And it's so interesting to see the legacy that different writers have left. And Ian Fleming has, of course, got this important legacy, but it's a legacy I think so many people misunderstand because they haven't read the books. So, it's, James Bond, that's sexist and
sexist, misogynist dinosaur.
Yes, absolutely. And then you read the books and it's like, okay, there are sexist bits in it, but also there's a deep understanding of people and women. You read The Spy Who Loved Me, and I think written from a female perspective, that's such an interesting thing. And it reads with a certain authenticity, like, maybe he's met somebody who's gone through these things. It doesn't sound like he's making it up, or a man trying to write like a woman. It actually reads like this could be a real woman who's gone through these things.
It is interesting, and I know we've mentioned it before, but I'm always so curious because you're interested in formula. And for me, I love the books where Fleming rarely throws the formula out the window. From Russia with Love is interestingly structured, but it's not structured like the other novels. And The Spy Who Loved Me is another one where it's really different from the others.
Yes. And I find it interesting because, as from a writing perspective, I self-publish. So kind of you understand what your formula is, and that's your bread and butter. And I think because books, it used to be more difficult to publish books, and publishers like to print books by recognized authors, and they would just print so many more of them. So many more people got Ian Fleming going against his formula, so to speak, reached and impacted so many more people than it would an author these days going against their formula.
Yes, and I'm curious about this. I was watching the Lucy Worsley documentary on Agatha Christie, and it mentions that Christie's first manuscript, ended with, the detective going to the courtroom, but she didn't know about courts and courtrooms. It didn't feel authentic, and the publisher gave her feedback, which is why it became, everyone sitting around in the drawing room, because then she could write it as she liked. And that feedback really changed it. So I wonder if with the decline of traditional publishing, if we are starting to miss out on, gems like that.
That's interesting, yeah, because they always say write about what you know, and it doesn't necessarily mean you should, like you should write about being a copywriter, or you should write about this. It's like, no, you could write exciting stories about people having adventures, but to make them authentic, you write about them taking place in places or their characters going through emotional things that they know. Because that's what adds the authenticity. Like what I liked about on His Majesty's Secret Service, I've said it 3 times now, was like all the bits in Budapest. It was like, oh, I've been there. This reads like he's been there as well. And I think he had just come from Budapest. But that's all the authenticity that really works. And that's, I think, why we love Ian Fleming's books as well. Because when he writes about Turkey, he's been there.
Yeah.
When he writes about America, he's been there. Japan, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he turned himself Japanese and married a Japanese girl out there, but he's been to Japan.
Well, there's an awful lot about food. I gained the impression he ate very well whilst I was over there. So when I visited, I followed suit.
Oh, one day I want to get out there and do that.
Yeah, and of course he mainly writes about the Caribbean, so
which makes sense. There's a scene he's in a fight with that character Canna Lyle.
yeah.
Which I don't know. Is this real life person? Oh God, what's his name? Andrew Tate. Do people know about him in the UK, or is it just American?
Yes,
I think.
Thing? Yeah, no, I think he's an internet celebrity. So
yeah. I loved the fact that this character Canna Lyle was totally 100% blatantly based on him, and obviously he's not. He changed his background. Instead of being British American, he's from South Africa, which also the Bond. The whole Bond series always seems to have it in for South Africans, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I seem to recall a song doing very well in the UK called "I've Never Met a Nice South African."
I was thinking the movie Casino Royale, the guy's car he smashes. That guy was South African, wasn't he?
Yeah, and was it Die Another Day?
Die Another Day. Yeah, he just punches him in the face.
Yeah.
Somebody really hates South Africans.
Yep. Yeah, it seems to be a thing in Western Northern Hemisphere literature, is that we don't like South Africans at all.
Yeah.
Just to set the record straight, I have met nice South Africans.
Yes, I met nice South Africans too. There was once a time a South African I knew burst into my room when I was working in a hotel in his underpants, accusing me of fooling around with his wife. I was utterly terrified.
Wow. I feel that's one for another podcast. Has this ended up in any of your books?
No, not yet.
Not
do I have any South African characters in my books? I don't think I do. But that's a good one. That's kind of like a secret Bond staple.
Yes. Yeah.
But I went off on a complete tangent. Yeah, the whole idea that I liked about this character Canna Lyle being based off Andrew Tate was the fact that Ian Fleming did the same things. There was Le Chiffre was based off Aleister Crowley, who was big new age law of attraction type dude in I guess he was a contemporary of Ian Fleming's.
Yeah,
but it's kind of, there's always these delicious little things where there's a character who's very clearly based on a real person, and he gets to have his sticky demise.
Yes, yeah. So as I say, when I was reading this, some of it seemed quite blatant. Oh, this character is that, and he's talking about this real politician. But that is what Fleming was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what you do. Half of my books, I grab real people and I change their names and put them in the story. And it's like in my head, it's quite sociopathic when you describe it like this. It's like you put them in the story and they're acting for you like actors in a play. But it means that when you write about them, in your head exactly what they're going to say and how they're going to react to things. And
the weirdest one I ever read was, have you ever read Carrie Fisher's semi-autobiographical novels?
I haven't, no.
Because it's about an actress who was in a movie that was super successful, but nothing to do with her. It was more the technical things. And there's the director who's more interested in technical things than the actors. And then her parents are, the father is a successful singer and the mother is. It's very clearly, who it is. You know who every single character is. Which one's George Lucas and which one's Debbie Reynolds and all that. It's quite surreal.
But then you get the fun of like you can change things can happen to them that wouldn't happen to the real person. It's not like Andrew Tate could go and sue Charlie Higson for defamation, because it's like, well, there are some similarities, but obviously this character is from South Africa and you're British American, and this character's somebody who could actually kill people with his bare hands, and you're like I don't know. I think Andrew Tate is an MMA fighter or something, but I don't know. It's fun. I like stuff like that. Little Easter eggs.
Okay, we have a minute left, so final verdict on the Charlie Higson book.
I think it was brilliant, and I'm really impressed with the fact that Ian Fleming Publications managed to pull this off within 2 months and do a really good job. They got the right author, he wrote the right book, they got it in people's hands exactly when they said they were going to. They managed to do it all in 2 months. I mean, it's incredible when you think about it. I think this is a real testament to the potential that Ian Fleming Publications has, as long as they stop censoring Ian Fleming's books.
Perfect place to end it. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you very much for listening to Roland, Hulme and I discuss Charlie Higson's On His Majesty's Secret Service. And of course you can find Roland on Instagram, Roland Hulme. You can find him on YouTube, Roland Hulme, and you can find him on Amazon, Roland Hulme, where you can find a selection of his novels. Again, thank you very much for listening, and thank you if you're one of those fortunate few who have taken the step to subscribe to my newsletter. I sent out a newsletter this weekend. Thank you to those who've responded, sent me lovely, kind messages. That newsletter is really just a slice of life, what's going on behind the podcast, what's going on behind the YouTube and Instagram, where everything. I try to keep it all positive and all smiles, but I thought the newsletter give just a bit of a life update. If you're interested, the link is in the show notes, and from time to time I do a lucky draw. The last one was just an Albion Never Dies mug that went out to a gentleman in India, so I hope you're enjoying the Albion Never Dies mug. I hope it's keeping you company during your medical studies, so thank you very much, and I say thank you very much for listening, and everyone who messages me. I appreciate it. Goodbye.